The moment you stop giving them power, the narcissist loses control. Discover the hidden strength in silence and why your refusal to react can be the most revolutionary act of your life. The narcissist thrives on attention, especially the kind that comes from emotional reactions. Their world is built around a fragile sense of self, an identity that is constantly seeking validation from others to feel whole. When they provoke anger, frustration, or hurt in someone else, it serves as a confirmation of their influence and control. This dynamic is not just psychological, it is deeply strategic, though often unconscious. They are attuned to the smallest signs of emotional disturbance, and they interpret those signs as fuel, evidence that they are dominating the interaction. For the person on the receiving end, it can feel disorienting, even exhausting, because the narcissist's behavior is designed to elicit responses that reaffirm their power. They may use subtle manipulation, sarcasm, guilt, or overt aggression to trigger a reaction, and when it succeeds, it reinforces a cycle that is difficult to break. Understanding this pattern is the first step toward reclaiming control. It is essential to recognize that their goal is not simply to communicate or even to argue. Their goal is to provoke, to destabilize, and to ensure that the focus remains on them rather than on any shared reality or mutual understanding. This awareness allows a person to separate the narcissist's behavior from their own sense of self-worth. The reactions that the narcissist seeks, anger, defensiveness, emotional outbursts, are often instinctual, almost automatic. When you feel that immediate rush of frustration, it is the very mechanism the narcissist relies upon. They depend on that split-second lapse in self-control to validate their supremacy. By seeing this pattern clearly, by recognizing that the reaction is not inevitable but a choice, an individual can begin to interrupt the cycle. It is not about suppressing emotions entirely, but about creating a space between stimulus and response, a moment where reason and self-possession override instinctive reactions. In that moment, power shifts. The narcissist, who expects chaos and disruption, encounters instead calm and measured presence. That absence of the anticipated reaction disrupts their sense of control, leaving them unsettled because the usual dynamics no longer function. This is a form of resistance that does not require confrontation or aggression. It is subtle, yet profoundly effective. It relies on the principle that the narcissist cannot sustain influence over someone who does not feed their narrative with emotional energy. By withholding the reaction they crave, you begin to reclaim not just the immediate interaction, but a broader sense of autonomy over your emotional life. Over time, repeated practice of this approach diminishes the narcissist's ability to manipulate, as they learn that their usual tactics no longer yield the expected results. It is a gradual, deliberate process, one that requires self-awareness, discipline, and a commitment to prioritizing your own mental and emotional health over the instinct to respond impulsively. By mastering this, you create a buffer against manipulation, a psychological shield that preserves your energy, focus, and clarity. It is a practice that strengthens resilience, teaching that true power lies not in dominating others, but in mastering your own reactions and maintaining control over your internal state. The more consistently you exercise this discipline, the less influence a narcissist can exert, and the more empowered you become in navigating all interactions, both with them and with the wider world. Silence and self-control are not signs of weakness. They are deliberate tools of liberation that allow an individual to reclaim authority over their own life. In interactions with a narcissist, these qualities become essential because the narcissist's power depends entirely on provoking emotional responses. When you respond impulsively with anger, frustration, or defensiveness, you are participating in a cycle that reinforces their influence over you. The practice of maintaining silence, or responding with measured calm, interrupts that cycle and shifts the dynamic in your favor. It requires an awareness of your own impulses and the discipline to pause before reacting, to recognize that every emotional outburst plays into the narcissist's hands. This pause, this deliberate withholding of reaction, is not passive. It is an active assertion of control. It communicates that your inner state is not subject to manipulation, and that your worth is not contingent upon their approval or disapproval. Self-control in this context is a form of personal sovereignty, a refusal to surrender your mental and emotional energy to someone whose motives are rooted in disruption and self-interest. By practicing this consistently, you train yourself to recognize triggers, to see through manipulative tactics, and to respond in a way that preserves your integrity. It is a slow, intentional process, one that demands patience and self-reflection, but the rewards are profound. The narcissist thrives on chaos, but when that chaos is met with calm, their strategies begin to fail. The absence of the expected reaction destabilizes them, undermining their sense of control and revealing the limits of their influence. Over time, this approach transforms the interaction entirely. What once felt like a battleground becomes a space where you operate from strength rather than reaction. Your decisions are guided by principles and reason, not by the emotional turbulence that the narcissist seeks to generate. Silence, when wielded intentionally, becomes a shield and a weapon. It protects your emotional well-being while also sending a clear message. You are not a participant in their narrative. In essence, you reclaim not only control over that particular interaction, but also over the broader patterns of influence in your life. This discipline of self-control fosters resilience, teaching that true power lies in mastery of the self rather than in domination of others. It reinforces the understanding that external chaos loses its ability to dictate your internal state when you choose not to surrender to it. The act of not reacting, of maintaining calm in the face of provocation, cultivates a strength that is quiet but unyielding, subtle but transformative, and ultimately liberating. Refusing to react is one of the most powerful ways to reclaim your autonomy and protect your dignity when dealing with a narcissist. Their influence is rooted in eliciting emotional responses, and every time you allow yourself to be drawn into their manipulations, you inadvertently give them control over your mental and emotional state. By choosing not to react, you establish a boundary that is both firm and uncompromising. This boundary is not a wall built from avoidance or fear. It is a conscious decision to prioritize your own sense of self over the narcissist's attempt to dominate or destabilize you. Autonomy in this sense is about recognizing that your life and your emotions belong to you alone. When you refuse to validate the narcissist's tactics with emotional responses, you reclaim the power that has often been unconsciously ceded. It is a subtle yet radical act of self-preservation. Each instance in which you hold your ground without reacting reinforces a new internal narrative, one where your value is not contingent upon external validation and your stability is not negotiable. Dignity is restored through this deliberate restraint. The narcissist thrives on humiliation, on seeing others unsettled, defensive, or hurt. When those reactions are withheld, they are forced to confront the reality that their influence is limited. This limitation can unsettle them profoundly because their entire strategy relies on the predictable chaos they provoke in others. Refusing to react transforms the interaction from one of manipulation to one of observation and discernment. You are no longer a participant in their constructed drama. You are an observer, choosing how and when to engage, if at all. This choice is empowering because it places control firmly in your hands. The process of refusing to react is not instinctual. It must be cultivated. It requires mindfulness, self-awareness, and a commitment to emotional discipline. It is natural to feel the impulse to respond, to defend oneself, to correct perceived slights. But recognizing that these impulses serve the narcissist more than you is crucial. By cultivating the ability to pause, to step back, and to act from principle rather than impulse, you transform vulnerability into strength. Over time, this practice fosters resilience. It teaches that dignity is not something granted by others, but something maintained through conscious action and self-respect. Refusing to react does not mean ignoring reality or pretending that manipulation does not exist. It means responding on your own terms, according to your own values, and not surrendering your mental and emotional energy to someone whose agenda is destructive. Every moment of restraint strengthens your sense of self and undermines the narcissist's power. It becomes a habitual way of interacting with the world, one that affirms your autonomy, safeguards your dignity, and reshapes your internal narrative, from one of reactivity to one of sovereignty. In choosing not to react, you create space for clarity, for intentional action, and for a life guided by your principles rather than the whims of someone else. True strength is not measured by the ability to dominate others or to force outcomes to your favor. It is measured by mastery over your own mind, your emotions, and your choices. In interactions with a narcissist, this principle becomes critically important because their attempts at manipulation are designed to provoke reactions that serve their sense of superiority. They rely on emotional turbulence to maintain control, to dictate the pace and tone of interactions, and to destabilize those around them. Recognizing that real strength lies in self-mastery is the first step toward resisting this influence. When you cultivate the ability to observe your own impulses, to understand the triggers that a narcissist exploits, and to deliberately choose your response, you assert a kind of power that cannot be taken from you. Mastery over oneself requires a disciplined practice of awareness and restraint. It demands that you pause before reacting, that you analyze the situation with clarity, and that you respond in a manner consistent with your values rather than in reaction to provocation. This is not an easy path, because instinct often urges immediate response, particularly when faced with insults, manipulation, or provocation. However, each moment in which you resist these impulses strengthens your capacity for self-control and reinforces the principle that your emotional state is yours to govern. A narcissist cannot wield influence over someone who refuses to be swayed by their tactics. When you embody this form of strength, interactions that once felt chaotic or draining become manageable, even predictable. You learn to navigate them without surrendering your energy or compromising your dignity. Furthermore, mastering your emotions allows you to make decisions based on rational thought rather than knee-jerk reactions. It creates space for deliberate action, for strategic choices that serve your long-term well-being rather than the short-term gratification of venting or retaliating. The cultivation of self-mastery also has a profound psychological impact. It fosters resilience, reinforcing the understanding that external events, including attempts at manipulation, do not have ultimate authority over your life. Your sense of worth, your stability, and your direction are grounded internally rather than dependent on the fluctuating opinions or actions of others. Over time, this internal strength becomes self-reinforcing. Each successful act of restraint builds confidence, which in turn makes it easier to maintain composure in future interactions. It shifts your identity from one defined by reaction to one defined by intentionality, clarity, and sovereignty. Strength in this sense is quiet, subtle, and persistent. It is not about winning arguments or proving others wrong. It is about cultivating an unshakable center, a place from which you can operate effectively, calmly, and strategically. When mastered, this form of strength neutralizes the narcissist's attempts at control, protects your emotional and mental energy, and empowers you to live with dignity, confidence, and purpose. Non-reaction is one of the most radical forms of resistance you can exercise when dealing with a narcissist, and it is often misunderstood. Many people assume that to assert themselves, they must confront, argue, or defend their position. However, in interactions with a narcissist, these responses typically reinforce the cycle of manipulation rather than dismantle it. The act of not reacting is a conscious decision to withhold the emotional energy that the narcissist seeks. It is a declaration that your inner state is your own, that it cannot be dictated, disrupted, or controlled by someone else's attempts at provocation. This approach requires a deep level of self-awareness and intentionality. You must recognize the moments when you are being baited, understand the tactics being used to elicit a reaction, and deliberately choose a response that aligns with your principles rather than your impulses. Non-reaction is not passive, it is an active engagement with your own mental and emotional discipline. It is the cultivation of a space between stimulus and response, a space where reason, clarity, and self-possession reside. Each time you practice non-reaction, you weaken the narcissist's influence. Their strategies rely on predictability. They expect that provocation will elicit fear, anger, or frustration, and when it does not, they lose their sense of control. The absence of the expected response creates discomfort for the narcissist, destabilizing the dynamic that they have worked to establish. Over time, this consistent refusal to react reshapes the interaction entirely. It shifts the focus away from the narcissist's agenda and back to your own autonomy and values. By choosing non-reaction, you demonstrate a kind of power that is often invisible but profoundly effective. It communicates that you are the master of your emotions and the architect of your responses. The practice also strengthens resilience, teaching that emotional stability is cultivated internally rather than imposed externally. You learn that your sense of self is not contingent on validation, attention, or approval from others, particularly from those who seek to exploit your vulnerabilities. Non-reaction allows you to operate from a position of strength and clarity, making decisions that serve your long-term well-being rather than satisfying a momentary impulse to retaliate. It transforms interactions that might once have been draining or destabilizing into exercises in self-mastery and intentionality. Ultimately, the refusal to react is a declaration of independence from manipulation. It is a commitment to self-respect, mental clarity, and emotional sovereignty. In practicing non-reaction, you build a shield against the tactics of those who seek to disrupt you, while simultaneously cultivating an inner strength that empowers you to live deliberately, maintain your dignity, and navigate the world with a sense of calm authority. This approach is subtle yet transformative, quiet yet unyielding, and it lays the foundation for a life in which your power derives not from dominating others, but from mastering yourself.